Aloha, and welcome to another Candid Conversation. This morning, we're talking with Floyd Jerkins. This will be a continuation of our previous podcast that you might have heard when I kind of labeled it that Floyd went on a rant. He got very passionate about the selling aspect of business and how we treat the customer experience. And we were chatting afterwards and noting that the business model that the industries are using, they no longer really apply to the world we're in today. So I'd like to start with that point. And Floyd, welcome. Glad you're here.
Thank you, Ron.
Why don't you pick up that ball and tell us, okay, what's wrong with this business model? What is this business model?
I don't know if it's wrong, because when you're driving profitability to the bottom line, you're afraid to touch anything because it seems to be working. To me, as an organizational development consultant, I always look at the whole organization and how does it work in harmony? Are all the pieces to the puzzle lined up correctly to achieve peak performance? If we're, dropping 8% to the bottom line, but we're leaving 2%, I don't think we're that good. And part of that, the psychology of that for me was understanding quality practices. It started with TQM and CQI, and now it's Six Sigma and all the rage of quality processes. And if we're sloppy and doing a lot of business, just imagine if we got really good at it. And it used to be that I think a business could take 10, 15, 20 years to get started, and it could fail quickly. And today that the failure rate is even quicker. And that's because of the outside inputs that are causing those businesses duress. So, when we talked about the sales side, I certainly, see that. I still see the sales side of the organization, still doing well because of profitability, but not as effective. When I start to talk to a business owner, I always say, can you show me how your organization is structured? And he said, well, yeah, I'll send you my org charts. So, okay, that's a start, and traditionally they're, PowerPoint based, or there's some charting mechanism, and they're more of, in the technical term, it's a matrix style or a patriarch style. And it's always from the top down. That type of methodology, if someone says they've got org charts to show me, I immediately roll my eyes and go, oh my gosh, because that whole paradigm in itself is flawed. That concept of creating that type of charting mechanism was developed in the early part of the 19th century. And as it was coming up, it was a way because of power and control, controlling lines of communications. And it was really more about the ability for the organization to create layers of management and create power controls. This manager managed this manager managed this. And, did it work back then? Well, a lot of it did. But I think as we move forward, when we look at social trends, I know, Ron, you've talked quite a bit about Generation Z, baby boomers, Generation X. We have Generation X decision makers on the front line today, but they're controlled by the power strings of the late boomers and the Depression era people that, I had a guy one time that in my company, we were selling mobile app as a part of it. And he said, Floyd, I don't want no damn mobile app in my company. And none of my customers have that. And I said, well, sir, hang on just a second. I want you to go out to your showroom floor. And I want you just to look at your customers that are standing in line waiting on parts, and tell me how many of those people are standing there, and he can, a lot of them are. So, oh, okay. So what are they doing? They're shopping somebody else, what are standing, at your showroom floor. And I think that's a real good example that illustrates that, I'm 63, Ron, and, I love to be around the young people because it's a learning experience. Now, there's some trends that I'm just not going to buy into. The F word is such a common word used today that it's such a waste of the English language. It's just not very proper at all. But yet when you look at the mobile apps that young kids have today where they're doing their financials, on an app, well, that wasn't back in the day. But I think as we look at the customers, are we still pushing the sales team towards making sales, or are we out identifying that customer and pulling that customer towards us? That's a difference. And we look at organizational models. I mean, I mentioned before, and it still starts with mission and vision. I mean, you got to have some type of a vision of where you want to be, and those statements of we want to be the best dealership providing the best service to all of our customers. I mean, that worked with a Depression era person because that's all we knew. But does it work with a Generation X? They're going, wait a minute, I got 57 questions why that doesn't work. So there's some real gaps, because I do think that if we can get the connectivity, between the generations and the businesses that find that connectivity, then you're getting peak performance from all layers of people. We can't have certain layers, it's just like any large multi-store complex. If I've got 20 stores, I've got 5 of those that I wish I just cut off and let them float away, because not all of them and all departments and all people are performing at the same level. Continuity in that is the key. So I think when we start looking forward, Ron, I think, we're going to have more connectivity. I just think there's no doubt about that. I think that we're going to see more and more of this information exchange, and at a high level where, a fundamental of business is, do you share your financials? There's still many operations that, that's taboo. We just can't do that. Now, I'm not advocating sharing balance sheet information, but income and expense by branch. I mean, there's all kinds of options there to share the numbers and let people know. I mean, but that's kind of a no-brainer. That seems like everybody should be doing that. You got to have some way to allow them to measure against themselves, if you will, but certainly more connectivity. And I think another big issue that's coming forward is these lower transaction costs. I think it's huge is the speed at which that's happening. White Castle introduced Flippy, and Flippy is a robotic device that actually cooks the burgers and handles the burgers. And I mean, now part of that is they're trying to prevent bacteria and infection, being able to control that. But it's also that robot is not going to say, hey, I don't want to come to work today because I've got something else to do. I mean, the speed of service, that electronics. Now, is it impersonal? Sure it is. But I think when we look ahead around 20 years from today and look back, we're going to go, well, computers are an important part. Robotics are an important part. AI is an important part. I had a lady friend of ours that we kept telling her she needs to buy one of the little robo vacuum cleaners, and she don't want that because it's dangerous. And I listened for the longest time. My wife said, go ahead. I went, no, I'm not going to say a word. It was just like my grandpa, my grandfather would cover the television up because, they were watching him, but he grew up in World War II, he grew up in that era where, well, I can't really speak to the points of how Russia was not a country, especially today with what's going on in Ukraine. It's just a mess. But, I think we're going to continually see this automation kick in, Ron. I really do. I think we're at the verge of it, where it wasn't that long ago, we didn't have these cell phones like what we have today. We didn't have when Steve Jobs introduced the iPod, it wasn't brand new. It was just better, and it was a better pitch. It was a better marketing, but it was a better product than what the Walkman was, and as we fast forward and look at technology, we're going to continually see, Amazon has set the world on fire with automation. They really have. They're the competencies that were brought to the table to their frontline people to be able to accelerate automation. That's just amazing to me. Some years ago, we had a chance to go into an almond farm out in California. And, I understand the mechanics of it, but the use of lasers to separate the almonds, the use of, it was just, my language then was rock and roll technology, at its best to provide, and they eliminated, 8 to 10 jobs, but they also had other jobs for those good people to do. So, and I think that and the society shifts, Ron, I think those are some of the biggest, the waves coming that, we're going to have to deal with.
I think you've touched on such a broad array of reasons, of circumstances, of situations that kind of say no matter what the business model is that you're going to create, it's dynamic, it's not static. It constantly is going to be changing as the world around us changes.
That's right.
As you and I've spoken, I believe that most of the model of the construction equipment space that I've been in most of my life was created in 1980, in the period 80 to 82, when Reagan and Volcker beat the heck out of inflation by crucifying us with interest rates. One of the dealerships I worked with at the time was Finning, and it's a publicly traded company, so I can talk a bit about it. And this is in the late 70s. So before Volcker got crazy with his interest rates, we did all a publicly traded company. We could float bonds, we could get cheap money, but the CFO of the company, very smart guy, his name was Vin Sood, he's since passed. He did all of our debt on overnight bankers acceptance because that was the most profitable avenue to take. You didn't have any money at play. You only borrowed what you needed. It was only there for a day. Hello, let's go. Well, here comes inflation. It went from, 3-4% pretty nominally in the 50s to 18 to 20%. We're going to see some unbelievable numbers. We'll be up into 10 to 15% very soon in America. And people will understand more viscerally what that means. But the business model was created afterwards, after everybody had adjusted their headcount to reflect the fact that I have to pay a higher interest bill. Well, if you reduce your headcount, that means your market coverage goes down. If your market coverage goes down, your customers notice, hey, wait a second, you're not paying any attention to me. And then the other intersection that came in, as you mentioned, here comes the 80s, continuous quality improvement. Then Jack Welch and General Electric with 5S. Now it's, or with Six Sigma, now it's 5S. And along the way, we've got really smart. We created people that we call black belts.
Right.
You know how to improve processes. Well, didn't you know that before?
Right.
What the heck was wrong with us? Well, what was wrong with us was we got in a rocking chair. We felt good when our results fit the model.
Right.
And the model is arbitrary because nobody records their costs the same way. Nobody has in a cost of sales for labor the same things. It's all variable. And, what are we trying to do? I just want people to get better at what they do. I want to improve the customer experience. Yes. And that's not measured in financials.
That's right.
So here we come. Yeah, you're going to need financial statements, but I want management reports too.
Right.
That if you want to leave the financial models the way they are, go with it. But I want to know how many times that customer is contacted by a salesman. I want to know what they talk about. I want to know how many times he gets an order versus the, this. So one last thing, and then I want to get back into your thinking. The differentiator in the old days was information. The salesman was required to transmit information to customers. The customers didn't have access to all of our information, the technical spec sheets and all the rest of that nonsense. Well, those days are done. The customer in many cases knows more about that vehicle, car, lift truck, engine, whatever it is, than the salesman does. And the customers are now saying to the salesman, look, don't call me, I'll call you when I need you. And if that's not a reflection of the relationship we have with our customers, I don't know what is.
You know, I always go a little deeper on those things because the question is why? Why does a customer say, hey, listen, Mr. Salesperson, Mr. Manager, I'll call you? It's because there's that value is not there. The value of that salesperson, the value of that operation is not as great as what they can access on the internet. So the businesses that continue to try to compete on price, I think that's crazy. You know, it just doesn't, that's a rant, Ron. I mean, that's,
Oh, no,
I mean,
but it's really valid, and too many people do that.
yeah.
I got
But
the
yet,
best price in town, so.
we know historically that people pay more for a service when they feel better about the service. You know, that, you know, the old adage of, you know, who do you sell more of? You know, a repeat customer or referral customer or a brand new customer? Well, you make more money on the repeat customer and the referral because there's familiarity. You service them. The front end sale is still made by what happens after that sale is made. It's all those steps behind it. And that's where this, you know, I think the ability for the organization to harmonize and to have a seamless process for that customer experience to go from one end of the operation to the other, and it's seamless, it clicks. And, you know, when you walk in, you feel it. When you call in, you feel it. You can tell by how the receptionist, how the, you know, I mean, I still remember all this on hold and the receptionist functions and all the discussions we used to have in our 20 groups about this. And every time somebody would say, all right, Floyd, you just be quiet for a couple minutes because we know what you think. You know, you made yourself known. Because this whole idea of using the automated attendant to answer your phone to me was crazy, just didn't make sense. And then to say, and to have it be that as the first point of contact was ludicrous. Now, I'm okay with a live person answering and then transferring to someone's voicemail if they're busy. I support that methodology. But we disconnected ourselves from the customer. I kept saying, I said, how many customers hang up? We don't know. Ask your telephone company. They can tell you. And when you find that out, I want you to call me. Calm down with the numbers, because you're going to be really surprised at the volume of people that do not like that. You know, well, that was a sign of, oh, we have to control our cost. We can't get somebody else in that. But yet we lost touch with the most important thing, you know, that matters. It's the customer. And I think that's where it's back to pulling that customer, you know, knowing that customer well enough that we anticipate what their next purchase is going to be, that we become a consultant to that customer, you know, that we're anticipating, we're giving them more value. And, you know, inside the operation, that's their focus. How do we help that customer, you know, improve their operation, improve their timing for the job, the speed of deliver, you know, all the things that we can help them. They have a lot of tools available, I think, in these operations.
Yeah.
Some of it's, I don't want to share it, you know,
Yeah.
I can't do that.
What's also interesting about the attendant, all of a sudden, the leadership of the dealers got religion about marketing.
Yeah.
Oh, I want them to be on hold because I'm going to run a 30-second advertisement here. I'm going to have a promotion of something while out here, that, you know, and they forgot that's what they wanted to do. What did the customer want? People didn't ask that question. And it all comes down to here, in my opinion, today, people are saying there's no more loyalty. I agree with that. Well, we haven't given any of our customers a reason to be loyal to us because we force them down our funnel of processes and systems, et cetera, not theirs. We've stopped asking, what do you want? What do you need?
Yeah.
You know, and it's rather remarkable that there's been this much inertia. You mentioned Steve Jobs and the iPhone. It's maybe been 12 years. Google's been less. Simon Sinek, which had made a fair amount of noise in the marketplace. That's a professor of Columbia. Most people know who he is. He wrote a book called Start With Why. What's your why? And it, to me, it was a really telling expose. He says, you go to a church social, if that still exists, or you meet with your neighborhood, your family, etc. People say, what do you do? And most people can tell you what they do. Yeah, well, how do you do that? And most can tell you that, not all, but most. And then comes the burning question, well, why do you do it? Well, to get paid. Nobody does a job to get paid. They get money, of course, but that's not what it is that turns them on. Why do you do this? Well, because I like people, whatever the different reasons are. And in his book, Start With Why. Same thing that you're saying. What is it that makes the customer experience better? And how do we do with that?
Ron, I think there's examples out there. I really do. I mean, here's one example that comes to mind. And just a few years ago that CVS was undergoing radical growth. But yet internally, there was a recognition about where do we want to be at in 10 years and 20 years? What's the legacy of our company? They took such a hard stance on tobacco that they quit selling tobacco in their operation. And it was a big profit center. Some of the old patriarchs in the organization struggle with it because how are we going to replace that on our bottom line? But yet, we're a health company, we're CVS, and they had to redefine. I mean, it took them a couple of years to redefine their total vision of what that company is. And it took them a long time to start getting their value processes established so they could walk the talk, because just to stay at the top of the chain isn't the same as the frontline people. And I mean, customers threw a fit about it, but the Marlboro man has died. I mean, it's been proven smoking kills people. And, that's a whole nother rant, because we could talk about why the government allowed, the tobacco company such a long leeway, but there was a whole lot of tentacles to that. But the main point here is that CVS made an executive decision. I think they backed it up with their values, and they made a radical change despite what it looked like. They made a radical change to their business model. And, are they better for that? I think so. I mean, that's, when you look at their numbers, they look better. I mean, they're healthy. Are they sustainable? Well, they look more sustainable than others. So, I just think that's an example of a company that has evaluated their principles and their process and said, we've got to make a change. And it's best to make a change before you have pain. Yeah. Because the one that are in crisis management, Ron, to say we're just going to change our mission and vision, that's not what happens in crisis management. That's a different animal. It's a whole nother discussion. We're talking about, what are the outside inputs maybe that could affect a brand to be able to help them understand how to make these changes. And then what are those key points, that affect it. And I think once, an organization gets that, because I think the winning businesses of the future are still culture driven. It's when you walk in a mall, Ron, you go by a computer store, and then you go by an Apple store. I mean, wow. I mean, that tells a story about not just the culture, but what's happened at a product development level, a distribution level. I mean, one of the reasons Steve Jobs picked Tim Cook was because of his distribution expertise. I mean, that was a huge piece to his puzzle.
There was it's interesting in a number of forms and directions. There was a big fuss last week when the world found out Tim Cook's pay package. 73 million, I think, was the number. And since he's been the boss, the share value of Apple's gone up like 1,000%. The question comes back is, how much is somebody worth? Well, when he's paid shares, and that means he has to buy them. And in order for them to be cheap, he needs to drive the value up, which is beneficial for every customer there is out there that owns a share. But I think there's a more telling argument about the business model and needing to be dynamic, and that's General Electric. Jack Welch, when he took over in the 1980s, said, I'm going to be the number one or number two in every supply avenue that I'm in. And we're going to be in finance big time. He retires, Jeff Immelt takes over. Arguably, Jeff Immelt is much more intelligent, much better educated, much better as a communicator than Jack Welch was, but he darn near took the company bankrupt because he did not adapt to the reality on the ground today.
That's right.
And I think we've seen that with car dealers.
That's right.
With consolidations, the small ones have gone away. I think we've seen it in the agricultural community, the engine community. Heck, there's only 3 or 4 manufacturers of engine anymore.
Yep.
Construction, mining, there's 3 suppliers today. Yep. I mean, this is remarkable. And yet we still operate on 600,000, 750,000 an employee or whatever the number is.
Right.
Culture, you know, there was a thing the other day that got my attention. I'm a rather direct person, and I always ask for a performance review from my bosses, always, and never got one. And the response I got was, well, did I give you more money? Yeah, well, that's your performance review, go away. And you know, my last boss in Quebec was the vice president of finance, and he was a pretty crusty guy. Not a hardship to work with, but he was a pain in the butt. So we would do this, and he said, well, okay, if that's the way you're going to be. And I went in and I said, it's time for you to have a performance review. And he looked up and he said, why is that? And I said, well, here's 60 days. I quit. That's your review. And I left his office, and he was out from behind his desk and down the hall catching up with me as fast as you could imagine. And it was the biggest mistake in my life. I was legally required to give them 2 weeks, but we were putting in a new computer system, and I wanted to give them enough time and make it transition seamless. Well, I got sick because I was trying to do too damn much and all the rest of the nonsense. Yep. They offered to double my salary, give me a car, golf club membership, all kinds of stuff in that 60 days. And my wife, Marlene, said to me, Ron, they're just trying to buy your butt. I said, of course they are. She said, are you going to take it? I said, of course I'm not. And I didn't. We left and everything's fine. But
that didn't fix the problems you were having. The money didn't fix it. You were still
money wasn't the problem.
Yeah, that's right.
You know,
right.
And people seem to, you know, Amazon's another beautiful example. You know, bookstores didn't see them coming.
Right.
I buy a lot of books. I read a lot of books. I hated bookstores because they never had the books that I was after.
Yep.
They had to order it, so I had to wait. So here comes Amazon. I have a broader array of choice. I can see what the bookstore can't show me.
Right.
It took them just as long to deliver to me. And then with Prime, I didn't have to pay for freight. So what the heck do I want to go to a bookstore for? And as a result of that, Borders, which was my favorite bookstore at the time, is gone.
That's right. Same concept on movie CDs and DVDs, same concept.
Well, Kanye West is at the moment kicking the music industry. The artists only get 12% of the revenue stream. He said, wait a second, we created this stuff, and it's the farmers of the same thing.
Right.
You know, it's everywhere in society. And that, I believe, is going to get a real serious kick. And who's going to do it? The Zs, the Xs, and the millennials, because they don't like what the world is that they're living in.
That's right. Well, when you understand what that big machine's doing, and then you start going, oh, wait a minute, you know, and the old adage about you can't fight City Hall. Well, that's not true. You know, I mean, it's not.
Look at the Supreme Court in San Francisco. There's an example, fighting City Hall.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm going to shift gears just a little bit. You know, if we look at the inputs of what create the business models, I mean, there's the centralization and the decentralization structures. You know, I do not think that in the future we're going to see highly concentrated, highly centralized style organizations. I think we're going to continue to see decentralized mobile units. I think we'll continue to see flatter organizational structures. I think we'll see those that are fitter. There's much more cross-department, cross branch, cross pollination of information. We're going to see people being able to access anywhere within the organization to get the answer that I need versus having to follow that traditional hierarchy of the parts guys at the counter. They want to return a part. The parts manager says, let me check with the parts manager. I'll get back to you tomorrow. I mean, that has to be instantaneous, right then and be done to satisfy that customer. It can't be minutes and hours and days for the delayed decisions. So I think those decentralization structures are going to be really, really important to speed up the customer experience. So underneath all that becomes company-based training, the ability to have the right people at the right time on the front lines. So you can't just put people out there that don't know your systems and your processes. So when you hire them, it's probably a longer onboarding process than just you hire them today and throw them out there tomorrow. So all this kind of integrates. I think another piece to this, Ron, is that departmentalization is really an accounting method. It's important that we understand our income and our expense streams as they come through a business. So we look at them by departments and we can judge and really have better insights to where are we in relation to profitability. But yet from a management standpoint, departmentalization isn't really the answer. We need to have this decentralization structures that allow these departments to cross over and to communicate and allow this exchange to go on, because we find new ideas when we do that. We find better servicing methods when we do that. We also find bottlenecks and problems. If we see that we're 10 steps when we should be doing 3, I always love to take a piece of paper and, an organization, how many people touch this? How many people should touch this? And it's amazing. Well, when we take that work order and we run all the way through, sometimes there's 15, 20 people touching those things when really there needs to be about 4, and at the end of the day, I think that's, it's process, but it's more important. I think we're going to have we're going to see more specialists, because I don't think any of us can absorb the volume of not just information, but the technical aspects of everything that we're looking at. Somebody doing a website, Ron, there's a certain specialty there. That same person can't repair a piece of equipment, but the person splitting a tractor, may be different than the guy who worked on electronics.
Yeah.
Because the older guy can still split the tractor, but the new guy didn't learn that in school. But he understands the electronics on it, but he can hook a computer up to it where the other won't. So, I think we're going to continue to see specialists, and that I think is an edge for a business when they have this. But that's the human capital. That's the investment in people, the training, the evolution, the growth. And we can't have high turnover, and we have to be able to retain that knowledge, and we have to, the melding of this boomer and depression era people to the generation X's and Y's and Z's, we got to connect that. And there's companies doing that, very successfully. But in the equipment space, marine is like light years behind, all that. Trucking is still behind the construction market. Automotive is ahead in the consolidation compared to the agricultural side, but there's numerous models and similarities there where many say, oh, there's not. So there's patterns that we can look at across markets that give us indications, but I don't think one market follows another one so clearly, but you're going to have to find those. That's where I always thought the Malcolm Baldrige Award did such a good job. They identified businesses within certain markets that were just doing an exceptional job. And it wasn't all of them doing the same thing, but it was somebody doing an exceptional job based upon the Baldrige criteria. And I always thought that was, very impressive, and if you can get that award, that's better than being on the front of your trade magazine, because I still remember seeing dealerships on the front of trade magazine, and hell, they were terrible operations. They weren't,
Yeah, I was on the front of a couple of magazines on things that we did, but your comment about decentralization and centralization, I think, is really on the mark. But the best example of the customer experience in my world is the old hardware store. You didn't know where anything was. It was a mess.
Yeah,
But the guy that ran the store knew where everything was, and he could tell you the price.
that's right.
He could not only do that, he could tell you how to use it and how to fix what it was. Well, what are you trying to do? And he'd lead you through it.
Right.
And that's gone. So the decentralized and centralization, loyalty to that hardware store, if they were still, Ace Hardware is my favorite today because they have somewhat of the same approach. But at Finning, we had 53 stores. And I was a really strong advocate of decentralization. I wanted stores, not branches. Stores. It's a retail store, darn it. It's not a branch. And the local people know that local market, and they run the local store to satisfy that local market. Okay, so here's where it got a little different. You can run the whole darn thing. I ran parts. But you're not going to hire anybody in the parts department without my approval, and you're not going to get rid of anybody without my approval, and you're going to meet my metrics. If you don't meet my metrics, we're going to be talking. So you can do whatever you want decentrally. You can run your own business, but here's the walls, here's the boundaries, here's where you have to stay within to play. I don't think there's anything wrong with that. One of the measures to me is customer retention.
Yep.
And okay, so the first fight I have with that is what the heck how do you define it? And the boomers and the silent generation, which is the people before the boomers, or the greatest generation first, and then the silent generation, they never wanted to look at retention. Well, the guy got sick. He didn't have a contract. He lost his foreman. He had a divorce, all of these things. So why don't we just measure up and down? I said, no. He bought and he stopped. That's it, period. That's defecting.
And the next question is why?
Well, the trick with that is, first of all, to be notified that they've stopped buying. Most dealers don't know that.
Right.
The second is, okay, what are you going to do about it? Well, and then we got into a big circle and had a chat. I said, why don't you pick up the phone and ask them? Oh, okay. So I want you to get notified. How long should it be? Well, 60 days of somebody not buying anything from you that the previous year they bought regularly. Call them. Hey, Floyd, what's happened? My deodorant break down? I noticed you haven't bought anything for about 60 days. You okay? And engage. I mean, at least you're showing you care enough to find, hey, Floyd, what's going on?
Yeah. I think I agree, Ron. I think that when the ability for the organizations to really move forward, when they have a market coming at them, they have to really understand their business model in relation to that market. But they need to understand their business model in relation to business in general. It's not just to your market, because diversification of your product categories, can become part of that. Because, who's to say that you're going to be selling the same products down the line than what you're selling today? You're probably not. Now, those that are tied into the OEMs as we know them, Ron, whether it's, whatever brand it is, those companies, I think, are asking the same questions, that we're asking today. I don't think there's any doubt. John Deere just revamped their whole vision, and put that out there. And I thought they did a very good job. They hit the things that I would think, but they hit 10 times more. And I mean, Caterpillar does a good job. I mean, some of these companies that have been at this for a while, they get it. I still remember when Bob Lane stood up at a division meeting and said, we're no longer a family-oriented business, and we're a high-performance machine. And oh my gosh, I mean, that's a negative, throughout. But from that segment in the marketplace, I mean, there's been more millionaires made, than others, and in all the capital goods side. So I think that's
Yeah, Bob Lane's a good example. Bob was a banker.
Yep.
I knew him in Denver when he was the regional rep, and I'm running a software business in Denver at the time that John Deere purchased a dealer management system from a company called Applied Data Systems in Phoenix, and created JDIS, John Deere Information Services. And I had dinner with Bob, and I said, okay, Bob, you got to tell me what you want to be when you grow up. Do you want to be manufacturing equipment, or do you want to be manufacturing software? And he laughed. I said, I don't think it's funny, because what you're doing is you're now starting to tell your dealer how they're going to run. So that tells me that you not only are comfortable with the wholesale world, but you know how to run the retail world as well. And you and I both know that isn't true. And again, he laughed. Well, he became chairman, and I called him in the first week, and I said, okay, have you figured out what you want to be when you grow up? And he started laughing again. And I said, well, the laughter is going to be more challenging, Bob, because you're going to have to make the decision. And they got rid of JDIS, and now it's called Equip. They got rid of the guy that purchased and rolled up all the dealers. They were going to try and become both the wholesale and the retail, a company called Nortrax. Now they're unwrapping all of that.
Right.
And again, it goes back to the same thing that we've been talking about. The model has changed, but the world that works within the model has changed faster, and the model hasn't changed to keep up. And that is going to be a serious problem, if it isn't already.
This pandemic, the COVID we've talked about this from an educational perspective, that it's accelerated some of the trends that were, moving along, but all of a sudden this was like you got hit by a freight train. It was like, boom, tomorrow morning, it all changed. I think we're seeing that today. Will we go back to having automotive lots with 1,000 cars, sitting on the lot? Will we go back to having your selection of combines? Will we go back to, a selection of backhoes? Will we go back to having these high inventories? There's an opportunity here inside the manufacturer side, because consumers have now, all of us, whatever we're buying, we've kind of got adjusted again to this short supply, model. Well, from a manufacturer standpoint, having, thousands of machines sitting on a lot ready for shipping, that's a lot of money. So, I mean, it could very well be that in the future, we're going to see everything pre-ordered, that's on a retail level. We're starting to see that in the automotive side, big time. We see that in the marine side. We see that in the trucking. We see that, anybody that's producing goods and services, now, if we're talking about making pens, cost of that is different, but we're talking about thousands and tens of thousands of dollars for product lines. It may be that in the future, we still see at the dealership level, they become more proactive in bolt-on attachments, because the manufacturer makes less lines and allows that dealership network to do more bolt-ons. That could very well be. We see some of that now, but can the manufacturer make everything for every application and make it all the time? Those inputs might not allow that for them to be able to drive their bottom line. So, that could change that whole distribution network from raw material, all the way through the manufacturing, then down through to the consumer, as we are.
Yeah, there's going to be, there's two themes I'm looking at this year. One is the customer experience, and the other is the business model. And the business model, I want to get on a financial statement on the balance sheet, the inventory of people. And, we've got the parts inventory, we've got the work in process inventory, the new vehicle, new goods, used goods, rental, all of these things, and none of them are as important as the value of the capital that you have invested in your people. Now, where I'm struggling is trying to come up with a gradation of skill set, which is why we have the assessments, and I'm getting there, but I've still got a long way to go. But once we're there, then there's going to be a very clear correlation between the skills of the asset on the balance sheet that represents your people and
Yep.
the results you get as a corporation. And that deals
Yep.
with culture and a whole bunch of things. But it,
I think you're further ahead of that than you give yourself credit for. I
well,
really do.
I don't disagree with you, but I'm never happy. It's one of the curses of my life. I'm actually reading a book on happiness, you know, as to how I can have a different perspective. But before we get too far off that track, I think we might want to wrap this up. The opening up of the business model, I think, is an important step. And you and I think, have given a pretty good rational expose of all of the things that are forcing us to change the business model and why we need to. And I'd like to use this as a continuing platform. We'll take a bit of a hiatus because of basketball and other things that are going on. And it's funny, I'm having to adapt to personal preferences. You with basketball, I've got another guy who looks at car shows. Yep. He's a gearhead and really, really good guy. So yeah, that's fine, because that's your happiness. I'm trying to figure out mine, you know. Why don't you give us a conclusion on this, if you can? Give us some kind of an ending.
Oh, I think the important thing is to look ahead and define what you want to be, then compare that to other successful companies inside your industry and out, you know, and look at that and identify what you do well and identify what you need to make improvements on, and then collaborate and communicate, you know, get your people involved, you know, let them become a part of it. Get really good at the definition of 10 questions, you know, the 10 questions you need to ask yourself to redefine your organization, you know, and then as you go underneath that, you know, they've got to be able to provide the process to support it, because you can't fake this. It has to be, you know, that value agenda, you know, the mission, the vision, that value underneath there. That's where the purpose comes from, Ron. That's where people buy in. That's where people go, all right, I believe this is the right thing because we value this customer, we value, and that's why I made that decision, you know, because sometimes decisions won't be correct. Sometimes they're going to be at fault, but then someone's going to come back and say, wait a minute, this is why I think this is the right decision. And then we have to change again. So I think that would be you know, change is happening whether you want it to or not. So it's influencing it and helping to shape it to the direction that allows the outcomes to be what you want for the company, I think, from a business owner standpoint. And then creating that value chain for your employees, because what, you know, who's more important? You know, the employees are. You know, we have to be able to keep these good people and allow them to have their opportunities to exchange ideas. And, you know, I still struggle. I just had a guy yesterday to tell me, he said, well, we don't have time to have meetings, Floyd. We were on Zoom and he said, oh, Floyd, he said, you know, I can see you roll your eyes. And I said, well, I'll try to control that. But, you know, you've got all these issues that simple communications would cure it, you know, just, and if you don't have, you know, 3 deep in place, then you need to start having each of these managers just need to have somebody that can kind of take over for them while they're gone for a little bit. I mean, if that manager can't even take a vacation, my gosh, Ron, that's just, you know, and if they're gone and their desk gets piled up with stuff and they're, you know, they never relax.
Yeah.
I mean, that's not, we can't burn people out, you know, because that burnout, just like as you said in the very beginning, Ron, it didn't matter how much money they offered you. You know, it was more about how to reduce my pressures. How do I increase the value down the chain that I'm working on, because I want to see success. You know, I don't see it. You know, I'm frustrated. I can't get it all done. And then they come back. It's almost like it's a very disrespectful thing to offer more money. You know, if they came back around and said, listen, we want to add 4 more people to your department. We want you to decide how those people need to be allocated, what they need to be doing. We want to lengthen that timeline that we put you on. We want to give you another 60 days. What would you have said then, Ron?
Well, let me give you the rest of the story. Because as I was going through this process of evaluating whether to leave or not, I got the outside auditors and we went to lunch. And there were 3 brothers that owned this dealership. One managed it, the other 2 were remote. So it was a bit of a risk, me having lunch with this guy. It was the senior partner that was responsible for our account. And he said, well, what are you looking for? And I said, I've asked that the department be completely rejuvenated, reorganized. And here's what I'm trying to do. And they're just pushing it off and not coming to any conclusion. And his name was Stephen. He said, you know me well enough that that's not going to go very far with me. And so that's what my problem is today.
So how long were you with them, Ron?
10 years.
10 years.
I started on a contract for a year to fix a specific problem with the computer. I became the parts manager. I became the general parts manager. Then at a point in time, my best man was the general service manager, and we weren't happy with the relationship. So we swapped jobs for a year with the company's approval and found that there was no difference as to who the leader was. And I put it down to the fact that there was a gene pool issue. The pool at the service department, when it is, was shallower than the parts pool. They didn't think that was funny. But then I did the first product support organization in the Caterpillar world. Then I became the data processing manager, and I did facilities. It was wonderful. I was put into all manner of things. And so I'm running the computer system. There's 11 stores or something in those days. This is 100 years ago. And I wanted to focus everything on the operating departments. I wanted to have a systems and programming crowd that did nothing but parts, another one that did nothing but service. And that's not necessary. You don't need to do any of that stuff. So and I told my wife, Marlene, that I was going to do this. She said, you sure you want to do that? And I said, yeah. He said, are you prepared for the consequence? I said, well, are you? You know, it was more important for her because anyways, he wrote a letter to the board, the owners in Ontario, completely supporting everything that I wanted, and wondering why the company didn't approve it and hadn't put it in place already. And I had a very close relationship with the president, who was the boss of my boss. And he's sitting in my office on the following Monday. I get in about 7 o'clock. He's there about 6:45 waiting for me with a coffee on my desk. And he said, I just got a letter from such and so. I said, uh-oh, have I still got a job? He said, you know, Ron, how many times have I fired you? And I said, oh, 5 or 6. He said, are you still here? I said, yes. He said, if you've ever got a problem, ever, about anything, at any time, you come to me, nobody else. He says, get started. All of it's approved. He got up and he left. I love this guy. If he was still alive and the phone rang, said he was in trouble, I would just ask, where is he? And I'd be on my way. And there's very few people like that in your life.
Yeah.
But every younger person, and I do this with my daughter and my grandkids, needs to have self-respect, self-esteem, inner confidence that they'll be okay.
Right.
You know,
right. No matter what.
Oh, it doesn't matter. Doesn't
Right.
matter. Bob Hewitt, I'm on contract. I'm out in a warehouse one morning. I'll never forget this. And he was an elegant man, about 6'2" or 3-piece suit. He comes out and I'm in sweat top and jeans, and I'm working my butt off. And he comes up and he puts his arm around my shoulders and he looks at me. He says, Ron, I'm really disappointed in you. And I didn't miss a beat. I said, me too, Bob. What's your disappointment? And you could see his face break down. You know, he was going to laugh, but he didn't want to. You know, he said, when you're finished with this, come on down. I want to have a chat with you. The thing he was disappointed with is we had some stock order vehicles that got blocked by a snowstorm in the north. And he was upset that I didn't see the snowstorm coming. I said, Bob, if I had that skill, I wouldn't be working for you.
That's right.
You know,
That's right.
so I want everybody to have access to the same experiences I had as a younger person in business. And I think that everybody would love that.
Yeah.
Let's find out how good you can be. Let's find out where the potential is. Let's give you every tool possible to get you there. And yes, we've come a long way, but we still got miles to go.
Right.
And this business model subject that we opened up today, I'm not going to close that for a while. We're going to keep revisiting this thing. And in the meantime, enjoy the heck out of the basketball the next couple of 3 weeks. I hope your teams win. I hope better that the games are good.
I hope the games are good. Yes.
That's the important thing. And thank you, Floyd. As usual, this has been, I think, very beneficial to everybody. And thank the audience, mahalo, for attending. And I look forward to having you with us again at another Candid Conversation in the near future. Mahalo.